All right. Thank you so much for having me here. Very excited to present today. So we are going to be talking about access and equity with the Microbit, but also looping in Microsoft MakeCode as well. A lot of my students choose to use Microsoft MakeCode for a lot of the reasons that we're going to be talking about today. And obviously, they just love using their Microbits as well. So let's dive into sort of our goals for this 5-minute lightning talk. So first thing will be accessibility opportunities that we can leverage that are built into the Microbit, but also that are built into Microsoft MakeCode. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about making coding lessons that are going to encourage equitable thinking in your students, and also encouraging yourself to think through a different lens when you're preparing those lessons so that they are equitable. So let's start with accessibility. Obviously, this is a very popular term right now because of our world. We want to make sure that those who are coding, those who are in our classrooms, are able to contribute because their ideas are obviously as valid as everybody else's. So one of the first things that I love specifically about the Microbit when we're talking about accessibility, when I think about it, I'm going to focus on the V2 Microbit, the brand new one that has been around with us probably about, I'm going to guess maybe a year. I feel like it's maybe shorter, but I love it so much. So a couple of things that we want to think about when we're looking at this new Microbit is leveraging some of these new features, like the touch sensor, for example. So a lot of our younger students are still working on their fine motor skills. The touch sensor, what I love about it the most is that even students who are still working on those fine motor skills, no matter what their age, can use the touch sensor because it relies on a gross motor skill. They don't need to worry about sort of being overly dexterous. They can tap it and they can achieve the goal of their program by using that touch sensor. We also have those high contrast LEDs for students who might have low vision. So that contrast between the black background of the Microbit with the red LEDs is not only engaging for students, but also it just creates a visual that's far more accessible to students with low vision. The notched edges, this is a new thing in the V2, having those notches along the bottom. While yes, it was fantastic for getting those gator clips a little bit more secure, but another way of thinking about it is that it becomes a tactile piece for students, again, low vision or who are beginning coders, if they want to be able to use that edge to feel their way to find the pins instead of what was traditionally a flat edge. Now they can use those notches to sort of guide their way. And then also just having built-in peripherals is such a game changer. In the past, if you wanted to use a microphone or a speaker built in for your Microbit, you would have to attach them with gator clips, or you'd have to use some sort of external piece to attach it. But now with those pieces being directly built in, we're creating an accessibility issue. We're not having that same accessibility issue, I should say, in the past, of where you might have to go and seek out those things. You might have to go and buy the microphone. You might have to buy the little speakers and attach them. Now they're just built in. You don't have to worry about going and purchasing them. And it just makes the coding experience, one, way more fun, but also just having it right there, such a bonus feature for our students to have that tool. So when we look at the actual MakeCode site, we're going to be talking about MakeCode from two angles. I'm going to talk about it from the angle of when your students are coding maybe independently versus coding dependent on some of the tutorials that MakeCode has built into it. So my favorite thing that is such a huge savior in my life is the fact that there is an offline version of the MS MakeCode site. So you don't have to even have internet to be able to use MakeCode. You can download that desktop app, have it on your computer, and you don't need the internet. And I know for myself, I work in a very rural area of New Brunswick, and a lot of our students don't have access to the internet, not because of questions of maybe being able to afford it, which is definitely still an issue in some pockets, but simply because in some of these rural areas in New Brunswick, the internet doesn't go out that far. We just can't get internet there yet. And so being able to install this and run it on a computer is such a gift, because they get all those wonderful features of MakeCode right there, accessible to them, no problem. Obviously, this being able to switch your scripting language from block to Python or JavaScript, that is something that we really need to start leveraging a lot more to get kids engaged and ready to elevate their own coding skills. After a certain point, the blocks are great, but you want to stretch your students over into the next steps of computational thinking and of coding. And so just being able to build something in block and then switch between the two languages and look at those differences, identify the changes, and really, really being able to sort of, find the similarities and find those differences and what does it mean and how can I then make those modifications and start thinking and programming in Python or JavaScript. I also love that there's the one-click download. A lot of our younger students struggle with the drag and drop. So the ability to just click and connect your device and then have it download your program instantly, it's just such a time saver, and it takes that cognitive load off of your students. They don't have to think about dragging and dropping or going and finding it in the downloads folder. Obviously, increase and decrease, it's a little thing, but it makes a world of difference when you have students who have low vision or students who just need to be able to focus on that one little bit of code instead of looking at a huge line of code. And then hidden in the settings, this is something that I don't make use of often enough, but I think people should, including myself, is a couple of different things here. The ability to print off your code and have a paper copy of it. And while that might seem a little bit silly, for those students like mine that are in rural areas where they're going home to maybe not a computer and not internet, being able to print off the code and put it in their backpack so they can still show their parents what they're working on is incredible. And it's such a gift. The ability to switch languages around too. It doesn't have to be in English. The MakeCode site can be completely in Arabic, completely in French, whatever language you need, it is there. And then again, high contrast mode, such an essential thing to have. Now, if your students are still dependent on the tutorials, obviously you want to lean into that immersive reader that's built into those MS Code tutorials. I cannot stress enough how important that tool is to getting those kids ready to code and thinking about coding, taking away that barrier, taking away that cognitive load while they're trying to learn something new is such an essential thing. If your kids are going to learn how to code, but they're still fussing around with trying to read the instructions, then you're not going to be able to get very far with them, and it's not going to help them. But if you can eliminate that cognitive load and get rid of that need to think about reading and decoding by just leaning into the immersive reader, allowing them to use it, it will take their brains and put that in a place where they can start thinking about coding instead of thinking about the fact that they need to read instructions.
Sarah, that was amazing. I hate to cut you off because that's so good. Oh my goodness. So we so appreciate your time. I know I picked up quite a few things. That was amazing.